The George Floyd protests started after George Floyd was arrested in Minneapolis, Minnesota on May 26, 2020, after being accused of passing a fake $20 bill. And even though Floyd wasn't combative, one of the officers, Derek Chauvin, put his knee on his neck for over 8 minutes while the other 3 policemen stood guard, and the onlookers basically begged this man to stop suffocating the guy. Even as the EMT unit came onto the scene, Chauvin kept kneeling on his neck, and Floyd died from suffocation in front of us. It was just sick. The unrest began as a local protest in Minneapolis, St. Paul, in that metropolitan area, but it quickly spread all over the nation to 2,000 cities and about 60 countries internationally in support of Black Lives Mattering and the Black Lives Movement, which is to stop police brutality and systemic racism. The protests have continued for well over a month and are still happening daily in the United States. So far, protests have led to numerous legislation on federal, state, and municipal levels that's intended to combat police misconduct, systemic racism, and qualified immunity, as well as overall police brutality in the U.S. But some of the protests have also led in many states to this wave of monument removal. All of this is happening during this global COVID-19 pandemic. So it's important to understand a brief history of the Confederate statues in America, because this is something most people really don't know unless you studied it. The vast majority of these Confederate monuments were built during the Jim Crow era, during around 1877 to 1964, somewhere in that era. And experts agree that they were not built as memorials, but as a means of intimidating African-American people and reaffirming that white supremacy is here to stay in America. So rather than honor these fallen dead, like building memorials right after the Civil War, the newer statues were purposely put up to glorify and pay tribute to Confederate leaders who were not only considered traitors, but they were fighting to the death so that they could continue to make humans into, force humans into a status of enslavement. I mean, it's sick. And during the 60s, civil rights movement, a lot of these statues were also posted up again. It's a sign, it's a symbol, it's a threat, and it's intimidation. At one point, there were over 1,500 Confederate symbols across the United States. Most recently, the state of Mississippi agreed, it's 2020, to change its flag and remove the Confederate flag from it. So that's an amazing thing. I'm thrilled. They're the last state in the United States to take away this symbol of white supremacy from their state flag. So the plight of the statues is something that we need to talk about briefly. A number of the statues have been torn down by protesters, kind of like suddenly in this acute, just torn down all at once during a protest, but others are being taken down through governmental decisions, and people have attempted to take them down, and what's happened is they've been fenced off, and there's police presence now, like 24 hours a day at these huge fences around these statues. So it's become a real political issue instead of a human issue, like a humanistic, like, the way I look at it is, who would want a statue outside their house that they have to look at every day of someone who murdered and enslaved and raped and God, tortured their relatives? I mean, who wants a flag that symbolizes that? It's beyond me why we have these anyway. So today, Behtaj and I are going to discuss the statue removals, and I want to know what you think, because people do have opinions on this, and they're very strong with their opinions. So let us know in the comments what you think, and we'll answer back. Personally, I'm overwhelmed by the sudden interest that so many white people have in Black Lives Mattering. And just the support of people coming out there to try to stand up for the end of police brutality and systemic racism in that regard. It's awesome. Black people don't need white people to solve their problems. Black people don't need white people to be the heroes. But for the love of God, the least thing we can do is support our brothers and sisters who don't deserve this horrific, I call it terrorism personally, a crime against humanity. When police are, police have always been the keepers, gatekeepers of systemic racism. And at first I was concerned that now the movement is broadening to statues and all that, and that there's a chance it could be diluted and the progress or the message could be lost. But now, after a while, I really am convinced that this is the time. People who care, maybe they haven't been involved in protesting, or they haven't, found their voice. This is the time. So I'm just pushing lots of education, and I'm trying to help and do my part to help use my white privilege to really jumpstart and keep this going so that real change can be made and we're not just, basically pacified. What do you think of all that's been going on in general, Behtaj? It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, it's, where do we begin? So much has happened in a month, but to everything that you said, I completely agree with you. A lot has happened, and this is a very important time. I understand what you mean by worrying about the message getting lost or anything, but I think the best thing for us to realize is that all of these different areas, whether it's police brutality or statues coming down or whatever, because all of these things this fight, not only was it so big, and it's going to be big, it's going to branch out into so many different areas of our society. But, I think that just further kind of solidifies the fact that this was and is a huge turning point in our history. It's a huge turning point in all of this. So all of it is connected. The police are, and the unfortunate murder, lynching of George Floyd is connected to the statues. It's connected to economic exclusion. It's connected to Jim Crow and redlining and convict leasing and mass incarceration and the war on drugs. Mm-hmm. All of these things are a part of the same thing. So it's not it's not that we're taking, or that the attention is being taken away from George Floyd. I mean, his name is memorialized, and unfortunately, many, many others, and also, unfortunately, many others that we never heard of. So all of these things are connected, and, this is, like I said, it's a turning point, it's a shift. And now it's not just going to be one thing. It's going to be everything. The entire system is what we're dealing with. The entire system is the issue. And so something this big and a turning point this, important must include the entire system.
Yeah, it's systemic racism's embedded in every way of life, every social system, it's the bedrock of American culture, sadly. And you're absolutely right. The Confederate flags, and I'll say it again, and these symbols of these people who wanted to enslave human beings and were willing to die for it, that's a no-brainer. I mean, of course they should come down. They should have come down. When I was younger and I saw them, I was like, oh my God, I couldn't believe it as a white person. Like, what a slap face. Why would we even have those? There is absolutely, it's not even a political issue to me. It's a human one. This past week, I went to Washington, D.C. to check out this Emancipation statue, which was a statue of Lincoln, located in Lincoln Park on Capitol Hill. And it depicts this kneeling Black man who was actually a former slave, the person who posed for it, wearing a loincloth with broken shackles, and he's touching Lincoln's standing up straight, and he's touching his shoe. Demonstrators who wanted this bronze statue gone were actually, when I was there, were meeting to talk about how they were going to go about it. They said it implies that Lincoln was the only benevolent person, and that, you know, it shows kind of a Black person like looking up to him like, oh, thank you, thank you, thank you, when really it was lots and lots of people, and lots of them were brown and Black people. There is a classic cliche stereotype of this white hero, and that's just not even close. It's ahistorical. It's really absolutely categorically false. There's no white heroes. Black people who were forced by white people to be in an enslaved status always fought to get free. And I just wanted to make that crystal clear. It's kind of sad that I have to, but because our whitewashed history is taught in general, absolutely horrifically in school, it's a joke. You know, it helps us to live a lie. White folks, we live a lie. It was just perpetuating this. And so they wanted it down. So the statue has drawn controversy from the moment it was dedicated. Frederick Douglass was friends with Lincoln, and Ulysses S. Grant was absolutely friends with Lincoln. They both were still alive, and they were at this ceremony. Frederick Douglass and Grant, they were there and they spoke. And I think that's really important to know. Funds for the memorial, the statue, in the 11th, year of his assassination, were entirely raised by freed enslaved humans, which included Black veterans of the Union Army. And this is according to the National Park Service, which controls DC parks. The organization in charge of commissioning and purchasing the statue apparently was some charity, and I do not know why, but it was run by white folks. And so something strange happened. I don't know, and I'm not sure if anybody knows what went on, if the people who paid for the statue wanted this for the statue or what. But I'm guessing it's not exactly what they had in mind. Maybe it was. I mean, maybe it was a statue trying to say thank you to him, because he did play a very large role, but he didn't play the only role. So I just want to make that crystal clear for white folks to understand. So in attendance there at the dedication was Ulysses S. Grant, who, as Lincoln's top general, he won the Civil War, basically, for the Union. And as president, he sought to fend off the ultimately, successful Southern effort to end Reconstruction and return power to white folks. He fought to try to stop the Compromise of 1877. I mean, he didn't want the troops to leave, and we all know what happened when the troops left. All hell broke loose. It was, slavery by another name, basically. So at its dedication, Frederick Douglass delivered a historic oration for the fallen president 11 years later at this ceremony. And he praised, it was very interesting. They said it was kind of similar to a lot of his speeches. He was known as a brilliant writer. He praised Lincoln, but he grappled with what he and others believed was his slow embracing of abolition. And those are his words, slow embrace of abolition. It should be crystal clear, for as slow as people believe Lincoln was, and kind of how it was, what are you going to do? Can't rewrite history, although white people try. Lincoln lost his life due to his insistence that slavery must end. And I think that is something, he lost his life. And according to records, he knew very much that there's a good chance he would get assassinated. Here's a quote from Frederick Douglass at the dedication of the statue. Viewed from the genuine abolition ground, Mr. Lincoln seemed tardy, cold, dull, and indifferent, Douglass said, according to a published version of his remarks. Here's another quote. But measuring him by the sentiment of his country, a sentiment he was bound as a statesman to consult, he was swift, zealous, radical, and determined. Though Mr. Lincoln shared the prejudices of his white fellow countrymen against the Negro, it is hardly necessary to say that in his heart of hearts, he loathed and hated slavery. End quote. That's a quote from Frederick Douglass. So those are his words.
Mm-hmm.
So what they meant to me was a person who, on one hand, was this way, and on the other hand was that way. I don't know if it was from politics. Did he evolve? I don't know. I don't know if we'll ever know. Statues that are coming down are ending up being not exactly Confederate statues. Like, I think a lot of things are coming down, and maybe not so much through a governmental decision-making process. And my only concern is that some things are kind of a gray area. And I mean, saying it's a gray area isn't really the right way to do it, but I know that obviously Confederate flags and statues, give me a break. But for example, when I went to DC, there was a statue that was actually paid for by former enslaved human beings. And that has actually ended up coming down. So I'll talk about that later. But I think it's important that the gray areas, or for example, somebody in one of the US, George Washington got, for example, George Washington's statue was torn down in Portland, Oregon, and Ulysses S. Grant's statue was torn down in San Francisco. And we're getting into some gray areas, and it's not my place. I don't lead the movement as a white person. I don't lead it as anybody. I just, obviously we're chatting about this, and I'm a little bit concerned that when things just come down and people might not know the right history, I don't know if it's Black people taking them down, which is absolutely their thing, and I don't comment on that, or is it white people taking them down? I'm not really sure. But we have to be careful as a group who wants equity and equality for everybody, that we don't go full circle and basically stop thinking and using our brains. Just tear down everything and be like a crazy. We got to really, because sadly the politics that are going on now are so divisive that the Republican Party of racism is going to really pounce on that. So I don't know, what do you think? I mean,
I totally understand your concern, and you're right. It's not white people's place to say at least certain things anyway. In regards to these gray areas, or I know what you're trying to say. So from what I've seen, the majority of the activism, and regardless of however it's, whether people are destroying property or whatever forms the revolt takes, it's not, I don't really judge, because I think, as we spoke about some time ago, that's the history of this country. White people themselves have only ever gotten their rights and protections by what they call, or what is called, rioting. They destroyed property, they attacked police officers, they've attacked politicians, and people that are usually protected by some law. So that in and of itself is not, we shouldn't even be discussing it, because it would be hypocrisy. But when it comes to these statues, at least, like I said, the activism that I've seen around it has not been misguided. All of the statues that they've been gone after and trying to go after, it's pretty accurate. And I actually think that this is a good conversation to have, because yes, there have been white people that were, with the fight to quote
Mhm.
unquote slavery. There was plenty of abolitionists. I mean, you mentioned Grant. I mean, we know Grant, Ulysses S. Grant. He came from an abolitionist family, and Lincoln never owned slaves. But um, the reason why I think it's an important conversation is because white people have never been perfect. And I don't want to say perfect because no one's perfect.
Right, right.
I think understanding that these men, and I can say with pretty a lot of certainty, every single president has been anti-black one way or another.
Mhm,
12 of them, I believe, were slave owners while they were in office.
mhm.
Um, every single one after that did their part to completely dismantle Reconstruction and everything that Black Americans tried to build for themselves when they were given the opportunity to build this new world after the Civil War. Um, and even going into the 1900s, yes, there were presidents that did certain things, and they made, in my opinion, I would say these were concessions, and concessions,
Mhm.
from what I can see, have never really made dramatic change. They have it's like they did enough to keep the slaveocracy exactly how white people wanted to be, but they just kind of moved it enough here and there and every
Yeah,
time period
yeah,
that.
concessions. That's why they're concessions, because they're not really.
And so that's why I just say these were concessions, and they never were really were that like revolutionary. So I'm saying all that to say that, Lincoln and, Washington, I mean, even Lincoln was said by many people, said he was an openly racist person. He was from, and this is actually why I say the conversation that you're bringing up here is very important, because yes, Lincoln was, known as the Emancipation President, and
Mhm.
he was the president that, it was his administration that, the Civil War ended and all of these things. But through his life, he still was a racist by definition. I mean, he never owned slaves. But Lincoln, through his life, also um, was not about ending slavery per se. He didn't like it. It's not like he loved it, but he was not trying to do anything about it, and he actually said that he believed that the country or the government, something like that, was meant to be by for white people. He was not about dismantling this white nation. Actually, what his whole thing was that he was about what they called colonization. They just wanted to, they were like, okay, well, we're going to free all these people that were enslaved, and we're just going to ship them off to different places. And, I think at the time when Lincoln was in office, it was like some island off the coast of Haiti. But this was their solution. Their solution was not, well, you know what, these people and their families and their ancestors helped to build this country, and they should be able to participate in the economy. They should be able to be free, self-determined, whole people, and they should be given reparations for the damage that was done to them. So, of course, none of these things were part of this solution of ending slavery. It was, well, we're going to free them and give them absolutely nothing, but we're going to ship them off to this island, and who knows what's going to happen. That's not really a solution. So that's just one more example of, I mean, Washington. Washington was horrifying. You know, every president, mostly in their own way, was extremely horrifying. I mean, I think James K. Polk, I don't remember which president he was. He not only owned slaves, and I think his brother-in-law was like the overseer or watched the plantation while he wasn't there, but he actually bought and sold slaves out of the Oval Office.
Mhm.
So, you
Right.
know what I mean? Like, I understand why people are going after these statues, and I think they all need to come down. Uh, at least regarding the presidents. I understand also what you mean by the Emancipation Liberation statue. I'm sorry, I actually don't know much about it. It was because of you that. Um,
Well, I'll tell about it later on. I have some information.
sure,
That,
but I to what you've said so far, I mean, I kind of understand. I mean, if that is in fact what happened, if formerly enslaved people, contributed to it somehow with all these, like, I understand that. But I think that American descendants of slavery probably also understand that too. And I think that, I mean, listen, the statue looks terribly offensive. It was not, I don't know who designed it. If a descendant of American slavery designed it, I mean, I respect them.
I can explain that later on. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure, but I have a pretty good idea.
But that's kind of where I stand with it as far as what I know of it. I just think that, I think the most important thing right now, like you said, is for us to support our brothers and sisters. These are people whose ancestors built this country. Our white lives only exist and only have existed because of our families came and settled, or were here for a long time and built all of their lives and accumulated wealth based on the privileges allowed to them through slavery. So as long as American descendants of slavery are the ones in charge of making decisions and doing things, I support it. I mean, it doesn't matter if I support it or not, but they are the only ones that really are rightfully supposed to be making these decisions and making the designs to which, how all of these things will happen. As long as that happens, then I feel that it's, going the right way. If other people are making these decisions, I feel like, I kind of really am only interested in what the descendants of slavery have to say and what they want.
Yeah, and that's absolutely where I'm at as well. The only reason I question these things is because, as you know, well, first of all, we're having a conversation about it. But secondly, as you know, I help to educate white folks. And, I'm kind of trying to look at the full picture. For example, Lincoln, and I'll quote later on when I talk about the Emancipation statue in the park that I went to in BC. But actually, Lincoln, that it was, honoring Lincoln, basically, what that statue was. It was completely paid for, according to the park services that I, researched, completely paid for by formerly enslaved people. It was their money. But then it ended up being commissioned by somebody else. And I'm not, from the moment it got put up, it was kind of questionable. But here's the thing with Lincoln, I think, and this is just my take on what I've read and what I've seen and heard. And, I'm not a PhD scholar in this area by any means, but I think Lincoln evolved over time. I really do. I believe that he was a politician, and he ended up, and I'm not doubting anything you've said, it's just that he ended up with a Congress that was absolutely not for allowing slaves to, the abolishment of slavery. So he had quite a job in front of him to get the votes to get this through. And I think he really evolved. I mean, he was out in the fields during the Civil War, not right, in front of the guns, but I mean, he was talking to the black militia that was put together. I mean, who wanted equal pay, even at that time. And he was out there talking to the real people, finding out, real stuff. And I feel like he evolved to a point of where he really did want to abolish slavery. I don't think he was perfect. I obviously don't know if, I can't, I obviously don't support his idea of shipping people off to another country. That's terrible. It should be they should be allowed to do what they want to do as full citizens. But, and if Black people want to take down his statue, no matter what the circumstances, that's not my say. I am completely out of the loop. I'm a white person. It's not my place. It's really outside of, it's crossing the line, I guess you could say, for white people to really give their opinions. We lost our chances to be the leaders a couple hundred years ago when we did these major atrocities. And yeah, sure, there were abolitionists here and there, and there always have been. But as a group, our culture is one of white supremacy. And so we don't get a say. That ship has sailed, so to speak. We don't get to butt in and get involved other than support. support. Now, the Grant statue is kind of interesting. Grant, and I don't think anyone would, dispute this. Grant won the Civil War for the Union. He almost single-handedly won the damn thing. And he's kind of been written out of history. His parents, as you said, were abolitionists, and he ended up marrying a woman who was, her father was a slave owner. Yeah. And so his family was appalled, by this whole thing. And her family didn't think he was good enough. I mean, he became president. And I know from history that he did evolve incredibly. He did own a slave. He was given a slave, and he did own a person, a human being. But he also, at his poorest moment in life, when he was impoverished, he gave that enslaved human being freedom. And they tried to talk him into, oh, you could sell him. And he said no. And he didn't have a cent to his name. So, I mean, it seems like, I'm not saying he's a good guy, he's a bad guy, but we need to know how it went down. And no person is usually completely evil. Well, I can name one, but that's good. Completely evil, or just, Mother Teresa. So people evolve and people change. And I don't know if he did or not, but I do know that he really supported Reconstruction. And he tried to stand up for Reconstruction. And it was very unpopular. So, I mean, I'm not an expert in his life, obviously. But.
And I'm no expert either. I mean, there's so much history, and there's so much history even with like each individual person. I totally understand what you mean. And like I said, I think these are great points. I mean, I wouldn't say that Lincoln was like, I'm not going to say that I don't think he was able to change. I'm not going to say that I don't think he was able to kind of look back and maybe assess things differently over time. I mean, this is the world, and I'm not excusing this, but this was the world that they grew up in. So
right.
This is the, so I understand he was racist. I understand he was very much about keeping America a white nation for white men by white men. But, when discussing the fact or his ability to change, which, like I said, I would never say he didn't. Maybe I'm wrong, but I can agree with you on that. Yeah. I think the important thing to talk about when you're discussing Lincoln and him changing, if people agree that he changed, is that a large part of him changing was because he had several abolitionists in his ear, including
Douglass. Yeah.
Douglass, and also, more remarkably, even as remarkable as Frederick Douglass was, it was actually, I don't remember their names, but there was, you see, at the time when the Civil War had begun, and even slightly before, I believe, enslaved people were escaping their plantations and running north. As soon as they were able to get into Union-occupied territory, they were kind of like free in a way. They were a lot safer, at least we should say.
You could cross the line, yeah.
Right. So there was 3 African-American men, or 3 enslaved men at the time, and I think it was like the James River. They crossed. Mm-hmm. Somehow they got into a boat and they crossed into Union-occupied territory, and so they basically began, freeing themselves through that process. But they were, I can't really remember details, but they were very influential in shaping Lincoln's mind. I've read a lot, and it really kind of seems like Lincoln had to be forced, in a lot of ways. It really took him some time to get to that point. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say these things. I mean, there's so many contradictions with these men. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, if to be honest, if any statue should be up of any white man, it should be John Brown. You know what I mean? But I mean, he led such an amazing revolt. I mean, he was killed, of course, but I don't even know all the details of his life either. I mean, from what I know, he was very revolutionary. And so in many ways, he was probably more revolutionary than these presidents. But
Yeah.
I think the important thing for all of us as white people to take away is, like I said before, is these stories are good and important, and I believe it's okay to see some of these men, at least not most of them, as having changed in their life, or at least maybe saw things differently, or maybe they just really saw no other choice at that point. But I think as long as we don't walk away with the good aspects of what they did, and let those things kind of overshadow the other things, and it's not to be like, oh, well, you have to focus on the negative, but I think it's shown that it's too dangerous to let the good aspects kind of overshadow the rest of it, because as I said earlier, for me at least, and many people that have taught me, it's important that we understand these contradictions, because today, again, many white people are, performing to do these good things, or maybe have also done some good things, but there's so many contradictions and there's so many other things that they're doing to not dismantle a white supremacist country. And so at the end of the day, those concessions can only go but so far.
Well, it's like, I think what you're trying to say, I absolutely agree with you, is this is kind of a microcosm of an example. I don't know if it'll match, but it's like the person who goes to a rally and stands up and then has lunch afterwards, but doesn't invite the Black people. It's like, we're not
sort of like that.
And also, we're not there all the way. I mean,
right. I mean, there are people that do that. And then there's, look, I mean, a lot of people, I'm not a fan of Mayor Bill de Blasio in New York City.
Right.
He is very problematic, and it's kind of funny because people get confused with his whole thing, because there's all of these like racist New Yorkers that hate him because he's not pro-police, but yet at the same time, he actually has not done anything to stop police from killing Black people.
Exactly. And you know what, Behtaj, I just posted a video yesterday on my YouTube channel showing him as the main dude or main guy in photo ops, painting Black Lives Matter in giant fluorescent yellow letters outside Trump Towers in New York City. He was
Meanwhile,
like, whoa, wait a second.
Yeah. Well, not only does that not gel with the rest of his administration and all that has done and not been done while he's been in office for Black people, but we also have to understand that he's running to do a photo op to paint Black Lives Matter on a street, but yet he just announced that he was increasing police presence in Black communities because of the supposed increase in shooting violence.
Right.
So instead of listening to protesters, instead of being like, well, okay, let's just say these shootings are legitimate because, maybe some of them are, maybe some of them aren't. We already know that the NYPD has been caught skewing crime data in order to benefit.
Oh, okay. That's what you meant by legitimate. Like, are they even being reported?
Right. Listen, the FBI said
everything's political.
10 years ago or more. The FBI said 10 years ago or more that there was already white supremacists infiltrating.
It's been infiltrated, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right. And that's even a kind of a problematic statement in and of itself, but I'll go into another time.
Because nothing's been done. It's like
nothing's been done, but we have to understand that the police are a white supremacist organization from their roots. So
absolutely.
you can't be infiltrating a white supremacist organization. White supremacist.
Right. Like as we described in our other talks.
But that being said, even if they're, yes, I mean, some of my close friends right now, I mean, two guys on his block from his neighborhood that he was friends with, they were just killed in the middle of the day. They were young and they lost their lives, and many others have happened, all across the Bronx and stuff like that. And it's very painful and it's very real. But in a time where there was just a major uprising in response to police murdering Black people, which they've been doing for over 100 years as police.
Absolutely.
but also, as we spoke about earlier, this is a fight that's going to address many different aspects of a very corrupt system. And one of those aspects is the lack of resources, the economic exclusion of African Americans since Reconstruction ended.
Absolutely, right.
This is why there's gun violence. There's no such thing as black on black crime. All of these things happen because Black people are economically excluded. American descendants of slavery have been economically excluded since day one, since Reconstruction. There's no resources in these people's communities. They have no resources that they need, and so the crimes could. So even if these killings happened at the hands of Black people in these neighborhoods, if they did,
loves to blame black on black crime. It's ridiculous. Whole thing's ridiculous. We created it.
Absolutely.
With created inner-city poverty.
Absolutely. We have to look at things in context constantly, especially in a country with our history. So, instead of de Blasio stopping everything and making sure that something is immediately done, and I understand it takes time to have systematic things done, but instead of going towards, a better solution, his solution is increase more police in those neighborhoods that clearly...
The last thing that...
Absolutely.
Go beat up and murder Black people.
Absolutely.
And
this is no solution. This is no solution. And so what does he do? Well, he goes and runs off to a photo op to paint Black Lives Matter on the street. Well, as nice as that is to see, and as important as symbols are, those letters on that street are not systematic change.
Nope. Yes. They're concessions, just like we taught. They're things that look cool, but they do nothing.
And the thing is that there's nothing wrong with them inherently. They cannot be used and seen as the answer.
As in and of themselves.
De Blasio is he's constantly doing offensive things to Black people. He does absolutely nothing for them. And we will really see how much money they divest from the NYPD going forward. But even that,
it's not enough. That's what I heard.
It's not enough. And even if it was enough, that's not even, that doesn't answer what's still going to happen to these people, these human beings that do these horrible things, that are in these positions. Well, what's going to happen to them? They're still in society. They're still alive. What are you doing about them? Taking money from the police force is an answer, but it's not the only answer. So this is what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. He's kind of a he's a real politician. Sounds like.
They're all politicians.
Yeah, he loves his photo ops, but it's so easy to get placated and to get like we were talking about. Oh, they're doing this, doing that, but when it comes down to it, we need huge changes, not little things that seem lovely but don't really create changes. Like, what are they going to do with the money? Are they just going to, what kind of social programs are they going to make to help these people? We did this. We created inner city poverty through redlining, through our tax and school-based structure, through, oh my God, everything we've done to stop Black people from being able to accumulate generational wealth. Yep. So it's really crazy, but.
Well, and this is again why it's important to understand these white people's their real history, you know, because even if they did good things, even if, a lot of these stories are meant to bolster these people's reputation, when really, it was enslaved African Americans that pushed Lincoln to do what he did, and so
right.
That point alone, out of many, of why that statue, that emancipation statue, is so insulting.
Yeah, and even the person I was with was kind of like poo-pooing it, and then I showed the person the statue, and then they're like, "Dang, that is a real slap in the face." And I mean, the truth is, we really don't know. Most people really don't know much about Lincoln's story and the details, and he was working with a nation in general that did not support ending slavery, North or South, really. And he had to be a politician, but he also had his own agenda. And, a lot of people try to say the Civil War wasn't even about slavery. I mean, there's so much misinformation.
Yeah.
All I can say is I fully understand the reasons why this statue is actually, as it turns out, going to be taken down. These things should have been taken down legally decades and decades ago. They should have never been put up. So, I mean, systemic racism permeates every aspect of our culture, and police have historically been the gatekeepers of racism, protecting whites and upholding the laws that were evil but legal, or just turning their back on horrendous evil violence because they believed it was socially, culturally okay. They're white supremacists.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, today in America with the police, you know, like we've said before, I really, you know, stupid, silly, naive white woman here, I really thought the police, and you can laugh if you want, because I'm kind of laughing at myself, would use this opportunity with the protests to actually show us that we're wrong. They're not bullies and terrorists and abusers, and quite frankly, they've shown absolutely, they've proven, I mean, like, they've made the case. They've made the case for themselves, the cruel, evil, horrible things they've been doing to people who are just nonviolently, quietly protesting. I've never seen anything like it. Police trauma, and with white people there, and with, you know, so.
This is what they do.
So the police brutality, it's really out of control. I mean, it always has been, but just what I've seen, it's video after video after video, all over in every state. And there's actually a log you can look up on Reddit that logs every single state and all the things that have happened and have been caught on tape for every state, and it's extensive.
Wow.
And these are just the things that are caught.
Oh yeah.
So, boy, yeah, these statues were interesting, and I'm glad that a lot of them are coming down.
Well, we have to understand that these people are also not going to. They're probably not going to take this so lightly. You know, a lot of people are they connect their identity and their pride with these, you know, these people.
With their whiteness, kind of.
Yeah, it's what, you know, it's what a lot of us, especially in the South, are taught.
Very disturbing, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry.
But I mean, look at our history.
Our history is absolutely barbaric. If you know what I always say to people when I'm working with people who are new to this, this is kind of a general weird thing to say, but I say it anyway. Take what you think the depths of systemic racism are in America, multiply it by a gazillion, and you may be getting close. And they're like, huh? Like, you know, it's not their fault. Yes, a gazillion. You know, I made a number up. I guess what I'm really trying to say is the depths of white supremacy and barbaric hatred and evil. Oh my God, in this society, I've read so much about history and what we as white people, no, you didn't do it, I didn't do it, I wasn't there, but did to our fellow humans is beyond human understanding and imagination. I mean, oh yeah. God, it's unbelievable. But
it's for sure, it's much worse than most people understand.
Oh God, yes, absolutely. So I think we need a ton of education, ton of education, and we need to get people in offices that are culturally competent. And I don't mean they know a little bit about, you know, Lincoln and a little bit about slavery and a little bit. No, I'm talking people who just get it, who have put in the time and the work and are going to continue to do so. And those are slim pickings. That's all I can say. Really slim when it comes to politicians.
We have to push. You know, these politicians are, you know, they're liars, they're business people, and there's a lot of performance that goes on, and these performances, they do a lot of damage. You know, citizens forget that we are the ones that these politicians have to answer to.
Well,
And
supposedly, and yeah, and that's a whole nother, that's a whole nother.
no, it is,
Yeah.
but this is,
Yeah.
but to what you were saying, the only way we're going to get those types of people is if we push.
Yeah.
And pushing may require, you know, withholding votes. You know, there's lots of ways that we have to show politicians that we are serious, and that if they don't meet our demands, if they don't
Mhm.
agree to do the things that we need,
Yep.
that we need to survive, that African Americans, that American descendants of slavery need to be made whole. If they're not willing to do these things, then what are we voting for them for?
Yeah, it's just too easy to trick the average American. It's just
Very easy.
talk's cheap. Talk is
Very
cheap.
easy. Everybody wants to everybody wants everything easy.
We got major issues here in this country. I got to say, I truly believe it's the end of our nation as we've ever lived it, but that's a whole nother chat.